Hi, this is Starkie Sowers. Welcome to the Nutrition Mission Podcast from Clark's Nutrition and Natural Foods Market. So the idea of this, Jessica, is to bring all sorts of things to the public's view as well as to some audible situations. So if you're driving down the road or you're doing this, you can listen to some of the episodes. We're going to have all sorts of topics, everything from like tea to sports nutrition to keto diets and the popular diets of the time. You excited for this?
So excited. So make sure you guys subscribe to our channel, and you can go find us on YouTube, like Starkie said. So are you guys ready?
All right.
We're all about the Nutrition Mission.
All right, so check it out. Today's topic is going to be about cod liver oil. You might be thinking, hey man, we already did a segment about cod liver oil, and truly we did. So I'm calling this cod liver oil part 2. So when I finished with the whole cod liver oil story last time, I kind of developed this theory in my brain, and I kind of mentioned a little bit in that episode about the 1918 flu pandemic as well as the COVID-19 situation. So I'm going to give you a little bit of details about cod liver oil, vitamin D, and things of that nature. So we're going to get you a little bit more like maybe savvy on the whole project because I think it's a very interesting project. So first of all, let's talk about cod liver oil. All right. So cod liver oil, dude, it's been around forever, hundreds of years. It's called a superfood. And we're going to look at that really fast. Why we call it a superfood? Obviously, it comes from cod, all right? And so cod's all over the different Atlantic and Pacific and different areas that there are. Typically, Alaskan waters ends up being a very rich source of pollock, which is a specific type of cod. All right, so that said, ultimately, where does pollock end up? Pollock usually ends up at the sushi bar. No, it's not cod, bro. What it is, it's the imitation crab stuff. That's the imitation crab stuff that they basically take, and they take the meat portion, so to speak, and they use it for that. The other place it ends up is in fish sticks, all right? Like fish sticks. Like, I don't know, maybe McDonald's has it, but ultimately it seems it's a very sustainable area that actually not only proliferates the cod or the pollock as it is, but the other thing is it's got incredible benefits when it comes to omega-3 fatty acids as well as vitamin A and vitamin D and things of that nature. So this is going to be a little bit of a history moment and stuff like that, but here's the deal. Cod liver oil itself is incredible for like a lot of things. In fact, it's not only good for like vision, it's also, and there's going to be a new twist on that because you think, oh, it's got vitamin A in it. Yeah, true. So the other thing, of course, it has vitamin D. Vitamin D, literally when it comes to vitamin D, we didn't understand vitamin D. First of all, we didn't discover vitamin D until 1936, which is going to be highly significant when we talk about this, all right? So 1936, we discover vitamin D. One of the places we find it, of course, is in cod liver oil. The reason why is because it was a superfood for so many years. People raged about what it was for. It's good for arthritis. It's good for vision. Helps stop rickets. Remember, rickets is a bow-legged situation, which ends up being a vitamin D deficiency. All these things, of course, was folklore for thousands in the last 200-300 years, especially, all right? So that said, cod liver oil has all these cool benefits. So when I was a kid, my dad owned a gym. You guys have heard that story probably 1,000 times. But the bottom line is people would come in. My dad sold supplements in his gym. He actually sold cod liver oil, all right? And so people go, oh man, I love how I feel with it. And it's good for this and it's good for that. Well, I'm like 16 years old, basically a high school dropout. I think I graduated with a 2.3 at a screaming rate. Of course, then when I went to college, I ended up on the dean's list because I finally find something that actually entertained me, right? As typical with most boys, by the way, heads up, they really don't do well at school. Sometimes usually it's the girls that do well. It's kind of that deal. And I'm not genderfying anybody or anything like that, but just typical, right? Boys are ADD. They need more exercise. They need more of this, all these other different things. Anyways, long story short, I was that guy. The only thing I would do, though, is passively, aggressively, all the time, read about nutrition. I was obsessed with it. I would go to Clark's. My dad's gym was 2 blocks away. I go to Clark's. I had to be there. I had to take the new glandular supplements. By the way, we're going to do another episode. We're going to talk about glandulars in a minute. So ultimately, look for a couple new episodes on that. So here's the deal. I was passionate about nutrition. The problem was nobody taught nutrition. So I started going to college thinking, I need to be an accountant, right? Now, blow that off. I took a biochemistry class. It was over. It was on. I knew this is where I belonged, and this is what I wanted to do. That said, going back to the whole cod liver oil craze, what bugged me when I was 16 is people talked about it. I'm like, show me the science. Show me the science. There's no science on this stuff. There's no, vitamin A, vitamin D, everybody knows about it. But arthritis, are you kidding me? How can this stuff help with it? All right. So we're going to look at those factors. But anyways, last time we did a segment, one of the things I talked about was this, the fact that I have a theory. Here's the theory. 1900s or late 1800s, early 1900s, cod liver oil was like a craze. Everybody was taking it. So I have this theory in my head that the 1918 flu pandemic, individuals that were taking cod liver oil did not suffer as bad as individuals that were not taking cod liver oil. All right? So check it out. It took me 4 hours yesterday, and I found the link. It is not only a theory, yes, it's a reality. We're going to talk about that. All right? So, and then we're also going to talk about its benefits when it comes to COVID. All right, so here's what we do, right? So here we look at cod liver oil. I think this company literally has been around for 100 years. I think they put that on the label somewhere. Been around forever, at least 75 years. Carlson, been on the market. I'll give you a little breakdown of some of the fun little ones that are around here. So this is Carlson's all over our shelves. We've had it forever. It's one of those things that's just going to be there. It's like a stock item. So then there's a couple, every now and then you run into some cool companies, and this is called Green Pasture. They ferment their cod liver oil. So here's one of the things that happens. On this particular situation, when you look at the supplement facts, you're going to see total omegas, total vitamin E, total vitamin A, total vitamin D. So what they do is they standardize this. What does it mean to be standardized? So let's say they take and ferment some cod liver oil. And so what happens during the fermentation process and the catching, it's a fish, dude. So check it out. Here's what's going to happen. The vitamin A content, the vitamin D content, it's going to change. Every fish is not going to be the same, right? So what they do is they extract the vitamin A and the vitamin D, and then they put an appropriate dose so it can guarantee a label on each one. So something like this was actually a fermented cod liver oil. It's got vitamin A in it as well as vitamin D, but they can't tell you because they're not going to register because it literally changes from batch to batch, all right? All right, so then there's other fun companies like this. This is Wiley's. That was the one that I was telling you about. Cool moment. One of the things that they do is they actually are under what is known the Marine Sustainability Act. And ultimately what they do is they guarantee how they're fishing, that they're not overfishing. They're not running around the world raping and pilferaging the land and basically taking all the fish for themselves, chopping off heads and sending them down the road, all right? So here's the deal. All right, so what they do, yeah, they get the pollock. Okay, obviously the meat, as we were saying, becomes fish sticks, and it ultimately becomes the imitation crab and things of that nature. What do you do with the brain? What do you do with the liver, right? So the liver, you can get some cod liver oil out of it. Then when it comes to actually the brain as well as some other tissue, that's where you find all the EPA and DHA in the brain and the skin. That's where it's at. All right, so remember EPA, DHA, those are our omega-3 fatty acids. In the world of omega-3 fatty acids, there's two omega-3 fatty acids that dominate. They're EPA and DHA. But let's go a little bit further. So we should probably stack this back a little bit so you can get a little understanding out of this. There's food sources for omega-3s. You might be saying, hey, I'm vegan, vegetarian. By the way, we're going to answer that question in a minute. So I'm vegan, vegetarian, so I do flax, and I do things like maybe walnuts, and then I also do things like hemp, okay, which is like some of my favorite foods, right? I love walnuts. I love hemp. I eat hemp. I drink hemp milk every day. I eat hemp butter and all sorts of crazy stuff like that, right? So here's the deal, though. Ultimately, what happens with those omega-3 fatty acids in there, they're not long enough, okay? So when I say that, basically what happens, they are 18 carbons long. The body has to take these and convert them into EPA and DHA. All right. So the EPA and the DHA is the stuff that actually really makes a big difference when it comes to the cardiovascular system. The DHA, especially for the brain function. We know that when it comes to females, when they're pregnant, when it comes to their babies, if they don't get some type of DHA, either from mom because she's eating it, or like some type of supplementation that she's eating, then ultimately the brain development, the last 30 days to 90 days, 90 to 30 days, that ultimately becomes a critical time where the baby needs DHA. Okay, so the worst part about that, though, is like when you go in to buy fish, and of course it says on there, hey, warning, this stuff's got mercury in it. Because it's got mercury in it, what happens is, if you're a mom and you're pregnant and you're eating fish, this could be a bad thing for your baby. All right, so wait a minute. I thought I needed DHA, so I got to get it from fish. Yeah, so bottom line is what you need is sustainable moments. So when you look at pollock that's out of the Alaskan area, Wiley's literally mercury-free. So what you got to do is look for those mercury-free moments. Anyways, ultimately we end up with those EPA, DHAs, and those are the things that help with the mental alertness, cardiovascular benefits. If you want immediate benefits from omega-3 fatty acids, you want fish oils. Don't get me wrong. The other omega-3s that you get from the vegetables and from the nuts and seed sources, they're beneficial, but the body has to convert them. You say, no big deal. My body converted them. Check it out. I went 6 months without taking any EPA, DHA. I did just all the vegetarian sources. Took a blood test. By the way, you can get a blood test. It's going to be available at Clark's. You take a blood test. Basically, you prick your finger, buy it over the counter, just swab up your finger, and then basically send it off send it off to a lab, and they send you back the results. D9, was at the bottom of the EPA DHA scale. Had to go back on fish oil, started using fish oils on a regular basis. Why doesn't my body convert? First of all, certain genetics don't convert. The other thing is, typically you got to have certain vitamins, such as vitamin B6, vitamin C. You also have to have ample amounts of magnesium. Well, of course I have ample amounts of all those things. I supplement, right? So then the liver's got to be in the process of conversion. Sometimes it takes up to 3 years for it to start to convert. No dice, dude. I do not have enough time to wait for 3 years to get conversion. I need the brain power now. Thank you very much. I'm going fish, all right? But I do have a fix coming up. So now let's go back to the whole vitamin A and vitamin D thing. Vitamin A gets discovered in probably 1911. It's like, one, obviously vitamin A, one of the first vitamins that was ever discovered, right? And so we actually know that vitamin A is necessary for the eyes, okay? So one of the things that also is necessary for the mucous membrane. Here's what we find out about vitamin A, literally, probably about, 1960, 1970. There's a connection between two parts of your immune system. And vitamin A actually helps to develop the substance that is necessary for the body, not only to create inflammation, that's the first part of the immune system. So let's say you get a cold or flu and you got inflammation everywhere. You got a fever, that's inflammation, right? So then what happens is the body has to adapt. And the way it adapts is it starts making a specific T cell substance that goes out to fight that invader. Well, if it doesn't have vitamin A, it can't connect between the inflammation and the adaptive immune system. Okay, so what that means is vitamin A became known as the antivirus vitamin. Okay, they actually knew in order to connect, but that was like in the 60s. So here's what happens later on, probably like late 80s, early 90s. They found out that people that ate too much cereal, because it's fortified with freaking vitamin A, started getting toxic amounts. So they're like, oh my God, put a war on vitamin A, don't eat vitamin A, which is a bunch of, well, whatever, I won't get into that. But the bottom line is this. Most people now don't get enough vitamin A anymore. So vitamin A, obviously rich in cod liver oil, becomes a great substance for the immune system for fighting off viruses, right? So then comes vitamin D. Like I said, we didn't discover vitamin D literally until 1936. We didn't know how vitamin D functioned, really, to be honest with you, until 1995. Okay? So think of all the years that go in between not knowing how it works. And here's what we know about vitamin D. Two significant things. Number one, vitamin D obviously necessary for calcium metabolism. That's the reason why rickets, which is bow-legged, if you've never seen it, just go to, a couple different places down in Mexico. There's deficiency, and you actually see some of the kids running around with it. It's kind of crazy when I'm down there. I always think, should talk to somebody, but anyways, you don't want to be invasive. So that said, ultimately what happens, we know that it became a fix for that, and they knew cod liver oil was the fix before they even knew about vitamin D. So the other thing that we find out about vitamin D is this: it's necessary for immune function. So how necessary is it? So let's say you catch that virus again. If you're deficient in vitamin D regulates that inflammation fever moment. And that inflammation fever moment also means secondary infections. So if you don't have enough vitamin D in the system and enough vitamin A, now all of a sudden the body's going into a massive, what is known as cytokine storm. So dig it up, cytokine storm, CYTO or whatever, however you want to spell it. Cytokine storm. We find out that the last COVID episode, that was one of the number one things with complications was what was known as a cytokine storm. All right. I won't get into the virus. I won't talk about the virus. But the bottom line is we know that insufficient vitamin D exacerbated this condition monumentally. All right. So, and it's a direct, and I can easily say this. You can go online, look vitamin D, look mortality when it came to COVID, and you can see all the charts and the graphs and everything of that nature. The more deficient you were, the increase in mortality, like substantial. All right. So we're going to work with this in a minute, all right? So vitamin D becomes critical for the immune system. Another thing is we actually find out that there's vitamin D receptors literally in every single cell in the body, okay? So that means they're like hungry to grab vitamin D. Well, if you don't have enough vitamin D, what happens with those cell receptors is they increase, actually, or rather open their doors trying to get more wind or more vitamin D in. So what happens is they're actually a competitor for what is known as angiotensin converting enzyme. Big name, okay, whatever you want to call it, A1, whatever. So the bottom line is COVID hits the same receptors. So if you're deficient in vitamin D, those receptors are wide open. And those receptors in digestive system, upper and lower respiratory system, which this COVID virus was very unique because it was able to leach onto those areas. So we found out that when there was vitamin D deficiency, it was a gateway for that virus to be able to jump in. Very interesting stuff, all right? So moving on. Omega-3s, obviously, we find out in the 70s, they regulate inflammation. So there's a balance between omega-3s, omega-6, saturated fats. And ultimately, we find out that the omega-3s and some of the omega-6s reduce inflammation. And it literally took that long to figure it out. The guy ends up getting a Nobel Peace Prize, I think, in 1978. So the reason why he figures it out, he's on the discovery to figure out how aspirin worked. So for literally 70 years, we took aspirin in a pill. We had no clue how it worked. We just knew it worked. But literally, this guy does the discovery and figures out, oh my God, here's the deal. These omega-3 fatty acids, the omega-6 fatty acids, they reduce inflammation. Well, the other different types of fatty acids that are saturated fatty acids create inflammation. Aspirin blocks their synthesis for about 8 hours. So it works about 6 to 8 hours, and then boom, next thing you know, it's over with, right? You got to take another aspirin, all right? So obviously the idea is using omega-3s on a regular basis, put your body in a more balanced inflammatory cycle, all right? So let's say you're vegetarian, right? And you're in a situation where ultimately you're like, you know what, dude? I'm not going to do the fish. Ain't going to happen. So by the way, how did the fish get the DHEA and the EPA? They ate algae. They didn't like make it. They got it from the algae. And so ultimately what everyone's doing now is they're just sidestepping it. So here's a cool product made by the Wiley Company. And they actually call it catch-free omegas. A couple unique things. First of all, remember I was telling you about those EPA and DHAs. They get an algae source. Basically, this algae source ends up being a source that, ultimately ends up being a source that's a very effective source as far as like direct to the DHA. The negative is there's not much EPA, all right? So then what they did is they went and got out so I like to say this out loud so you can hear it, some ahi flour, all right? So there's, by the way, not ahi tuna, ahi flour. So this ahi flour ultimately ends up being in a situation where it has abundance of these omega-3s that need to be converted. But they got a weird one called SDA, not to do Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay, it has to do with SDA, right? So ultimately this SDA rapidly converts, and it doesn't have to go through the conversion enzyme that gets blocked so often, making it like a great substance. So one thing about a superfood is this. We talked about here the vitamin A, there's vitamin D, there's omega-3 fatty acids. I gave you a vegetarian alternative. By the way, they put vitamin D in this as well too. So it kind of mimics like what you would get from cod liver oil. So then the other thing that happens with a superfood is it literally is one of those things that you turn around and go, oh, hey, check it out. I didn't know it had that in there. By the way, omega-7s, did you know omega-7s are great for the eyes? They actually help with dry eyes. Well, where can you get omega-7s? Oh, check it out. You can get it from fish oil. You can get it from cod liver oil. Didn't know that, right? So we're going to hear more about omega-7s as the years go on, but ultimately the Wiley's company pops out another product, ends up being an omega-7 product that's great for like dry eyes as well as for the mucous membranes and the skin and other different things. Kind of a cool moment. They call it Vision. By the way, they've got some other things in there. I think it's not really something I would market just as Vision because it kind of gives you this little mental perk, which is kind of fun. I kind of hit it as a couple of different things. All right, so that kind of gives you a little foundation.